This is my review of my coaching session that I did as part of the 16.3 assignment. So the main aim of our session was to try and help the students improve their technique when running a relay. And not only did we want to try and help them individually by teaching them techniques that would make them faster, we also tried to help them when working as a team, and we did this through demonstration and review using a teaching method called whole part whole. So to try and achieve this aim, we broke down our session so that it had two main objectives. The first of these was to try and improve the students' timing when they are running the relay, as this is important in an event like this because it will help to make the relay run smoother and quicker. The second objective was to try and improve their technique when they were passing over a baton, and again this is very important in a relay and requires a good technique and concentration level. So when I look at my own performance within the session, I can see that there were both some strengths and some weaknesses in both the planning and the delivery stages. So the first strength in my planning and delivery was the idea of using progressions within my session. When I was planning the session, I felt that it would be very important to include gradual progressions throughout the whole of the session, as this would challenge the students more and not only make the session more enjoyable, but also avoid any kind of tedium that could have been present if the session was all the same difficulty. Another strength was the structure of the session, and this kind of ties in with the use of progressions, but I feel like the session was structured very well as it included all the necessary parts that a good session should have, including an introduction, a warm-up, a main activity, a cool-down, and then a conclusion at the end. And I feel it was important to include parts such as the introduction because it allowed us to not only introduce ourselves, but also gave us a chance to introduce the session and what our aims were and how would we try to achieve these aims. As well as this, I feel like the conclusion that we did at the end was also important because it allowed us to both give feedback to the students and also receive feedback from them about how they felt the session went. It also gave us a chance to review the session with them and then ask them to try and recall what the aim of the session was, as well as the key teaching points that we had taught them. In the delivery of the session, I felt like some of the other strengths included my communication, the encouragement I gave, my body language, and also the use of Q&A throughout the whole session. And I'll go into more detail about some of these strengths in a little bit. So, as well as the strengths, there were also some weaknesses to the session and my performance as a coach, and one of these was the idea of adaptations. And although we didn't have to make any, I feel like if we did have to adapt the session in any way, it would have been difficult and we may have had the session may have not worked as well as it did. And another weakness was the health and safety aspect of our session, and this was because none of us as coaches were first aid qualified, and so if an incident had occurred we wouldn't have known what to do, and this was very probable because on our session the surface that we were working on was slightly slippery. And again, I'll go into more detail about those weaknesses further on in the presentation. So when I mention opportunities, what it means is what I can try to do to improve on my weaknesses. And as you can see in the column, I've got coach observation and first aid courses. And then the threats are things that might hinder my chances at taking these opportunities. So going on these courses, such as the location of the courses, the cost of the courses, when they are, and things like that. So now I'm going to review 3 of my strengths in a bit more detail. And the first one that we'll look at is my communication throughout the session. So I feel like this was a strength because me having a good level of communication with the group it allowed all the members to understand the aim of our session and the objectives, as well as the instructions that I was giving to them at different points throughout. And them understanding this instructions ultimately resulted in the session running much smoother because everyone knew what they had to do. And it also had an effect on me as a coach personally because it allowed me to have more confidence, and this therefore made me feel more comfortable as the session went on. Another of my strengths was the use of progressions and the competition aspect as well. And so, as I mentioned before, I felt as though our session really had to have a lot of progressions, as this would make the session more exciting. And if the session had no progression in it, then the students would have got bored, and they could have meant that this could have meant that the effort levels that they were putting in, they might have decreased. However, during the planning, I wanted to make sure that there was a good level of progression, as I've said, as this would have made the students enjoy the session more and avoid them getting bored or experiencing tedium. And also adding competition to our session really just backed this up, this idea even more, as it made the session more fun and it made the students more competitive when they were performing because they wanted to try and beat their friends who were in the opposite group. And then the final strength was my movement around the whole group and the space that was provided. So me moving around the whole of the space that we had and making sure that I was interacting with every member of the group was another strength because it meant that I was able to talk to all of the members of the group and give them either praise, motivation, or sometimes constructive criticism on areas that they can improve on. And it also helped me to avoid any kind of inequality that could have occurred if I just stayed in one space and just interacted with one or two members of the group. And in addition to this, interacting with the whole group allowed me to get feedback from all of the members because I was asking, I was using a type of Q&A interaction where I would ask them if they understood my instructions, and then if they had any questions about what they were asked to do, they could ask me and I would respond. So now I'll look at the weaknesses in more detail, and the first of these that we'll look at is the health and safety aspect. So I mentioned this briefly earlier on in the presentation, and now I'm going to explain in a bit more detail. So what I mean is the health and safety aspect of the session was good when we were delivering, in terms of there being no equipment out that could have caused injuries or any other objects around that could have been a possible risk. However, as I did mention, none of us as coaches were first aid trained. And what this means is that if someone did have any injuries or something worse happen, any casualties, then me or any of the other coaches, we wouldn't have been able to react and help the person that was injured because of our lack of knowledge about how to perform first aid. So if someone had got injured during the session, which was very probable, so for example, by slipping over on the wet grass, I wouldn't have been able to help and treat that injury. And then the same with first aid. If someone had required first aid, I wouldn't have known how to treat them because of my lack of knowledge. Now, obviously, there were teachers around us who were also watching, and they would have been first aid trained because they're PE teachers. However, if I was doing a session on my own, then I wouldn't have had anybody to help me. So this affects all of the participants within the group as well as the coaches around me because, again, if something happened to them, the same thing would apply. I wouldn't be able to treat them. And so to make sure that I'm better prepared in the future, I can go on a first aid course where I can learn about how to effectively deal with and treat injuries and how to perform basic and advanced first aid if it is required. And this will benefit me because any sessions that I deliver in the future, I'll be prepared for any possible injuries or casualties that could occur, and I would know how to treat them. And it would also make me feel more comfortable when I would be delivering a session because I would know that I would have the knowledge about how to perform that first aid rather than worrying about if something happened and me not knowing what to do. So the next weakness was my control of the group. And I feel as though I didn't control the group, the whole of the group, as well as I could have done throughout the session and the length of the session. And this is because the group was very spread out because of their positions in the relay and the space that we had. And this meant that no matter where I stood, some members of the group were out of my control because of the distance between me and them. And this meant that there was the possibility for some members to mess around or not listen to my instructions, which resulted in them not knowing what we were doing at that point in the session. Now, I could have made all the members come into a circle around me and then explain the teaching points I was trying to deliver. However, I felt that if they were in their positions in the relay and ready to run, then they would be able to understand what I meant better and clearer, and they would be able to visualize themselves running and doing what I was telling them. And this again affects all members of the group, because if one or two people don't understand instructions because they're far away from me, they mess up the activity for the whole of the group, and especially in a session that's working on a relay, because teamwork and concentration is so important. And so to resolve this issue, there are many ways that I can improve. One of these would be to go to my local athletics club and watch how the coaches take control of the group. And I could do this 3 or 4 times a week for a month, let's say, and then I could note down how the coaches there take control of their groups. And then I could take these ideas, and this would allow me to gain more experience on how to effectively control a large group. As well as this, I could ask the coaches there to watch me deliver a session, and then I could get feedback from them about how I performed and how I can improve. And then the final weakness that I'll evaluate is my time management. And what I mean by this is that I felt like we didn't plan our session well enough to fit the 1 hour time period that we had to deliver this to the students. And due to the students performing well on the day, they had progressed through the different drills quite quickly, meaning that they were left with some time at the end in which we had to quickly improvise for something to do. And this meant that towards the end of the session, it became quite messy, and didn't target the session aims as well as the session did before this time. And so again, this issue affects the participants because it means that they're not learning any new skills or techniques, and instead are just messing around or wanting to do something different. And so to improve, I can go on a coaching course that focuses on athletics and specifically relays. And this would last a day and would cost approximately £160. But on this course, I'll be able to learn new types of drills and activities that are suitable for a session based on relays. And then I could use these new drills that I've learned in my own sessions. And what this would mean is that in future sessions that I'm delivering, if there was any free time at the end, I would be able to set up a new drill for the students to perform, and then they would learn a new skill rather than them messing around and not learning anything new.